I had 2 duplexes under contract in March of 2020. We were closing on let's say March 28th or something. And the governor of Tennessee declared a statewide emergency and shut the state down on the 25th. I was like, well, there goes the deal. And, it killed the deal.
Wow.
So, there are things that come up that you have no control over. But on the other hand, there are things that just kind of fall in your lap sometimes.
You're listening to the Accredited Investors Only podcast presented by Accredited Life.
Brian, welcome to the show. How you feeling today?
Hey, doing well, thanks. Wonderful day today in Franklin, Tennessee. It's sunny out and a little bit cooler.
Yeah.
But how about you up in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, well, it's been crazy the last couple of days. I mean, last night it was pouring rain, just coming down. It was like cats and dogs coming down. And today it's sunnier and definitely cooler. I put the sweater on. Over the weekend, I think it was like we're almost touching 80. So it's just crazy for this time of year. So, wait, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a tornado come through the other night. So my son woke me up at about 11:45. I'm like, "Hey, Dad, there's a tornado warning." I'm like, "Okay." So we watched it. It went away, went north of us. So, but I don't think anybody was injured. So that's good. But this time of year, it's crazy weather.
Yeah, it's just that transitional period where it's you have days that you're still in winter, other days where you're kind of in spring, other days where you're maybe even in summer. So it's just wild. We don't get too many the tornadoes. So we always get the warnings here and there. I think maybe we get them from like kind of parts of Jersey, maybe, so we'll see them. But fortunately, that's not something that we have to deal with too much of.
Well, that's good. That's good. It's definitely something to get used to.
Yeah. Well, let's start with introduction, Brian. Who are you? What are you doing? Why are you here? All that stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a lawyer and a real estate investor and an author. I've authored a book on, buying real estate, and in my day job, which really pays all the bills, I'm a tax attorney. And so I'm the tax attorney for the firm. We do a lot of real estate. We're probably, if I had to put a number to it, about 90% of the work we do here at the firm is all real estate related, whether it's doing, a syndication deal or a 1031 exchange for a client, or, even litigating matters around real estate, breach of contracts, construction defects, things like that. So we have a big land use department as well. I think probably the largest in the state.
Wow.
And so with being so close to Nashville, we're 20 miles south of Nashville is where my office is, but we have another office location up in Nashville proper. And so if you've ever been to Nashville and just look in the skyline, you'll see about 12 cranes in the air at any time.
Mm-hmm.
We have a ton of work going on in and around the Nashville area for development. So that's really what we do. We're very real estate focused. But my job on a day-to-day basis, whether it's doing mergers and acquisitions with selling a client's company or helping a client buy a company, I look at the tax impact of that and try to make it less to the client, mitigate that, whether it's restructuring and how we figure that out. That's a big part of my life here at the law office. Just a little bit of educational background. I went to the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga, and then I went to law school at Samford University in Birmingham, Alabama. And then I got a LLM in tax law from Georgetown University. I worked for Ernst & Young in DC for a while, and then made my way back home. So this is what I do. This is all day, every day, about 12 hours a day. Real estate, talking to small business owners, real estate investors of all stripes, whether it's, hey, we're getting into a real estate deal, or we're going to, put some money in this deal and try to get some passive income coming in. Just that's what I talk about all the time, just all the time.
Nice. Well, you must enjoy it then if you talk about it all the time, right?
I really do. I think of the practice of law. I mean, my specific niche is helping people grow wealth.
Yeah.
So if we can minimize the amount of tax that is coming out of your life and reinvest that into assets that produce income for you, allow you to shelter some of that income along the way. And then we can start talking about asset protection, generational wealth, things such as that, that allow you to live the life you want to live and have your money work for you instead of you working for your money.
Mhm.
So I think you and I are, probably still on the way to getting our money to work for us, grinding it out every day. But, it's very possible. And, I'm very fortunate. I've got my own real estate portfolio that does pretty well. And I've been investing in real estate, I guess, since 2018.
Mm.
And I've gotten to the point where I'm starting to invest in syndication deals as a GP and as an LP. So, it just kind of it snowballs.
Yeah.
And once you get these separate streams of income coming in, you realize that, well, maybe I don't need to work a 14-hour day. Maybe I
Yeah.
can work a 10-hour day.
Mhm.
Uh, so that's kind of like what my whole life revolves around, is helping people focus their energy on multiple streams of income, wealth creation, and while they're at it, let's throw in some tax planning as
Mm.
well.
Wow. Nice. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. Let's start with like just the legal side of tax strategy. Yeah, because I think a lot of people think of, they have a conversation, multiple conversations a year with their CPA and their accountant, and kind of on how to how to strategize and things like that. What does the conversation on the legal side look like? Is it all just kind of structure and how things are structured, and or what does that look like?
So that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked it, because so many people complain like, "Oh, my accountant didn't tell me." I'm like, "Well, that's not really your accountant's job.
Mm.
Your accountant's job is to make sure your numbers are accurate,
Mm.
that it balances. And when they take those numbers and they put it into a 1040 or a 1065 or an 1120 or an 1120s, the tax returns, um, everything needs to be accurate. And that is what an accountant does. They make sure the numbers balance, they make sure all the boxes are checked and filled out right. You're not going to get a lot of strategy, because by the time you get to an accountant, they are looking backwards, and there's very little they can do after the year is over to say, "Oh, well, maybe you should have done this." An attorney, on the other side, when you meet with an attorney that is going to help you strategize, we are forward looking. So we're putting a plan in place. We take historical information, we look at it, we're like, okay, well, if we do it this way this year, and we move this over here, and maybe we restructure your company, you're going to be a lot more tax efficient. What does tax efficiency mean? It means you're not we call it leakage. You're
Mm.
not leaking money out to the IRS in the form of ordinary income or capital gains. So we're trying to keep all that within your wealth pile.
Mm.
And if we can do that, we we work with your accountant to make sure that, hey, we're checking in every few months. Hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we've done. This is how it needs to look. Are you okay with that? Can you help coordinate, the numbers? So if you think about an attorney, we're kind of your coach. We're showing you, hey, if you swing the bat this way, you can hit it to center field or left field or right field. We're trying to get you to focus how you're living your life.
Mm.
Here's a great example. A lot of people think an LLC is a wonderful entity, um, for real estate investing. And I'm just going to talk about real estate investing because it's top of mind. But um, other people will say, well, no, I want to own it in an S corporation. If somebody said, I want to own my real estate in an S corporation, I would blanch. I would be like, "What? Why?" Because an S corporation is not where you want to own real estate, given certain tax treatment of changing the name or
Mm.
disposing of it. It's just treated differently. Um, and then you have other people like, "Oh, I love my LLC, but I'm going to tax it as an S corporation." I'm like, "Oh, don't do that. Leave it as a partnership. It's much more easy to move that asset around." So you have to educate your client along the way. And some of it is unpacking what they've already done and say, hey, maybe that is not the best way to handle that. Let me show you why it's not the best way. And let me show you a better way to do it. Now, ultimately, it's always up to the client, but I'm just trying to make their lives a little bit more simple, because when people hear the word tax, a couple of reactions are usually coming out of them. And one is, nausea.
Mm,
The other one is like, oh God, I've got a headache now. And the third is like, I don't even want to talk about it.
mhm,
My role, I really think, is to help demystify the tax code and
mm,
show them, hey, not all tax lawyers are, pencil pushers. I'm not crunching your numbers for you. That's what your accountant is for. I'm simply creating a strategy. And I think if you can see over my shoulder here,
mm.
that's my whiteboard. I was actually diagramming something out for a client and another lawyer. And so that's kind of what my life looks like. I'm always drawing pictures, because if you can visualize it and then I can walk the client through, hey, this is how this works, it seems to hit home a little bit better for them.
Mm. Wow. Which there's a lot to unpack there. Just thinking of the audience in mind, we have a lot of listeners who are accredited investors who are investing in 506 type syndications and funds and that kind of thing. Off the top of your head, how if they're going through their should they be investing through their personal name? Is there maybe a better way to do that? Through an entity structure or something like that? Like, what's usually your advice for somebody that comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to get into these syndications and funds," and how's the best way to be structuring it from a tax perspective?
Yeah. So when a client comes to me and we've got an offering going on or something along those lines, I typically encourage the client to set up an LLC. I would prefer nobody own anything in their personal name.
Mm,
You want that liability shield. You also want the ability to do some planning. If it's all in your personal name, in my mind, um, that that's exposure, and I don't want
mm,
clients to be exposed. I always want some sort of liability shield around them at all times. And, moreover, if you're going to invest in an offering, a 506 deal, um, there is nothing that says you can't bring a partner into your deal later on if you want, and then maybe that's a way to buy more of the offering. So having that structure together it just provides more flexibility for you,
mm.
as opposed to doing it in your individual name. I am just a big proponent of not holding anything in your individual name, not only from an estate planning standpoint, but from an asset holding standpoint. Um, I just think, hey, as much protection as possible, you always want to go that route.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Now what about somebody who comes to you? Like, how do you usually, like, when should a client come to you? I'm assuming ideally it's before they get into something and not necessarily after the fact, because there might not be something they could do, or the process could be, costly or a little painful, from a processing perspective and all that kind of, administrative perspective. So when do you
Yeah.
usually suggest people come to you?
Yeah, typically I encourage people to meet with a person like me, a lawyer like me, when they're starting to germinate the idea of, hey, I want to do this, let's talk about it. And so you start the conversation. And as that germination of that idea grows, maybe into a syndication deal or something, you start walking them down the path. I'm like, all right, well, let's set up the LLC and let's get the offering together. Are you going to be a GP? Are you going to be an LP? Are you going to be both? What is your role going to be? What's your capital contribution going to be? How much money do we have to raise? What does the capital stack look like? Are we going to use mezzanine? Are we just going to do LP directly? Is anybody going to contribute property? So, for example, I've got a client right now, fairly young guy, about 41, and he wants to do a syndication deal. He wants to be a GP. And we were talking, and I was like, well, if you have cash flowing assets that you can put into the deal, that'd be great. That way, as you add more assets to it and you bring on more LPs, to keep growing the fund, um, you already have a basis to work with. So we started that conversation, I want to say 2 weeks ago. And I checked in with him last night. He's like, look, I'm still noodling on how to do this, how to raise the funds. I'm like, that's fine. I'm just checking in with you to see where are you in the process. We spoke for a couple of hours and, we kind of diagrammed some things out. And now when he's ready to pull the trigger, we'll start setting up the structure for him. We'll set up the GP structure, the LP structure. The GP is going to own the fund, the LP is going to own another part of it, and then it's going to own another LLC under the fund that's going to hold the assets. So you start explaining all that to him, and so much of what we do is education.
Sure.
We need people to understand, what does this look like? How does it actually work logistically? So many people just don't understand that what goes into a syndication deal, or like when you have accredited investors and they're like, well, I want to pay $100,000 into this deal. What am I paying into? So much of what we do is helping them understand what this really looks like from a legal and a tax standpoint. Because without that kind of understanding, they're just putting money into a deal and they really don't know how the money flows. Because you need to show them how the money flows. Is there a pref or a preference rate to the LPs? Is there, a time horizon, or is there an exit strategy here? What's the deal? How does it work? What is it going to look like to you monetarily? And, do you want to be a GP? What does that mean? What kind of managerial duties are you going to take on? So, lots of education, which I enjoy. I enjoy talking to people about these things. And, quite frankly, we probably do an offering a month right now. We're so busy, and, the market is tumultuous. I think that's a fairly neutral statement to make right now. Interest rates are slowly coming down. The real estate market's really starting to come back to normalization. But I was talking to not only a client, but a friend at the gym this morning, and he's getting into RV parks. And then he wants to build a trash transfer station. Like,
Interesting.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
And he's an accredited investor as well. And I was like, well, what kind of investment are you looking for on that? And so we were talking just quickly about it. I'm like, well, let's do a syndication on that. Let's raise some funds. This could be a big deal. So, that's really what I do all the time. I'm always talking to clients, always educating clients. And then on the backside of that, I'm reading a lot. I listen to a lot of tax podcasts. It's super boring. But people like me, that's what I do. I listen to this stuff and I read it, and you read, you know, you read things in tax journals and real estate journals, and it only helps the client, especially the accredited investors who are looking to grow their wealth.
Yeah.
So, that's a day in my life.
Yeah. Well, you have an outlet to actually use that information compared to other people that might just be gaining it and maybe don't have, a way to share it or put it into their personal life. For you, it's actually, it comes in handy, and it's a tool that you can use, with your clients and in your everyday life.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I have social media, and on the social media, I give little small vignettes of like, hey, do you know about this tax provision? Or this is how this works, or maybe you shouldn't do this and maybe you should do that. And that's all free content. But like this morning, I'm looking at a 280 capital G issue, which is a golden parachute. So that's not really something I would talk about on social media. Like, what is a golden parachute? How does it work? What are the requirements? What does the math look like on that? That's not really sexy stuff. More on social media, people are worried like, hey, can I take the home office deduction? Or can I write off the mileage on my car?
Sure.
That kind of stuff. But in my day-to-day life, it's much more like business centric. golden parachutes or exit strategies, DSTs for real estate,
Mm,
things like that. But yeah, the social media does give me a little bit of an outlet to give back to people to demystify the tax code a little bit.
mm,
But my day-to-day life is much more, I guess, high-end specific.
mm,
So, like, we're doing a $55 million deal right now that has been going on for a few months, and we're redlining documents and making sure that the tax flow, the cash distribution waterfall works for the client really well. So that's what my day life looks like. But when I work with clients like like we're talking about here, accredited investors, I really have to bring it down and not talk like a lawyer, especially a tax
sure.
lawyer.
The head starts spinning and the eye
Yeah, people
glaze
just get
over. Yeah,
glassy-eyed and just,
exactly.
walk away. Yeah, that's happened. So
I bet. And now for on the like the security side of things, from like a fundraising perspective and all, do you get involved in that, or do you have somebody at the firm that specializes in that piece?
yeah, so I'm typically involved in that, and my law partner, his name is John Field. He he really runs these kind of syndications. So I get brought in to help draft and look at the tax distribution waterfall and make sure it flows right and to do the structuring work. But John is really our securities guy. And, when we're talking about a 506 offering, you know, we're always trying to make sure, hey, we've got to check everything on this because it's got to go to the SEC. So that's one of the things that, I am part of on a regular basis. Whether it's, a cross-border transaction, we have investors from
Mm,
out of the country that are wanting to buy something. How do we do that? How do we domesticate them so they can actually buy? Because there is a prohibition on some countries owning, some citizens of other countries owning real estate here in the United States or getting into deals here. So there's a lot of complexity that goes along with it. But at the end of the day, we work as a team and we tend to knock these deals out on a regular basis.
wow. Now something like securities, that's a federal thing. Like that can cross, any state lines. From a tax perspective, when it comes to the structuring on that end, any restrictions there, or do you tend to have, depending on what the person's doing in the transaction, people have Delaware entities or Wyoming or Nevada or something like that. I mean, do you work with clients in all 50 states? And then what are the intricacies then, when it comes to working with those clients?
Yeah, so I work with, and everybody here works with people all over the country. I don't think I've worked with anybody from Alaska, but I've talked to people in Puerto Rico. I've talked to people in, a lot of Californians. There's a big migration to east from California. A lot of Californians are doing investment deals right now. So talk to a lot of people from there. Just anywhere in the country, really. We do the work everywhere, and because tax is federal, I'm constantly involved in something,
Mm,
especially when it comes to partnerships. Now, your question earlier in this little question string here is that, if they have a Delaware entity or a Wyoming entity, that in and of itself doesn't really affect the deal. But when we get into family offices or
mm,
using trusts, we do have to coordinate with those particular investors to make sure they understand what this means. For example, if you have an irrevocable trust that is investing in a deal, okay, because the beneficiaries tend to want to know, well, how does this work? I'm like, well, from a tax standpoint, all the money's going to the trust and you're the beneficiary and it's only on a distribution to you that you would really need to worry about a tax issue.
mm,
But, they just want to know, is the wealth going to grow? What does that look like? Is it capital gains? How do we do this? So we tend to walk them through everything. So like I said earlier, they have a really good grasp of how the money flows and what it means to them. And it doesn't matter if you're in Wyoming or Delaware or a trust. Our job is to simply educate you so you know what this means for you.
mm. Interesting. So speaking of like a family office type of a structure and all, like how much do you want to get involved necessarily with your clients, CPAs and other maybe professionals on their team to make sure that everything's lining up and everything makes sense. What's that part look like?
So that's really an important and an integral part of helping a client grow their wealth. You need to have a team.
Mm,
And I say this to everybody, like put your team together. And here's who you need on your team. You need a lawyer, you need a CPA, you need a bookkeeper, you need an insurance agent.
mm,
And I'm not talking about property and casualty. I'm talking about like whole life,
yeah.
uh, something along that lines. A lot of people use infinite banking through whole life insurance policies a lot to invest. And I also want your financial planner to be involved in these conversations so they know what's going on, how it fits into that particular person's plan. We need a free flow of communication and information going back and forth so everybody can get the client to where they want to be. And ultimately, my goal is to help clients live the life they want to live. You know, the 9 to 5 is, it's a grind, man.
Mm,
And when, you're an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor, it's not 9 to 5. It's
sure.
typically 7 in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. So, 13-hour days are normal. And when are you going to get to use the money you've worked so hard for? So I tried to encourage those particular professions like, hey, you need to start getting other income streams.
Mhm.
You don't want to die at your desk. You want to get other income streams coming in. So you're not retiring at 65. Maybe you're retiring at 55.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about that. So you obviously got into the real estate world. What was the catalyst there? Were you seeing other people doing it, or what was what brought you into that space?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So I want to say it was like 2010. I got approached by somebody who's still a client, and he thought he had a usury issue because he had loaned money. And I don't know what the interest rate was. I want to say it was like 11 or 12% at the time. And
Um,
usury is mandated by the state. Like
okay. Mhm.
there's not a federal usury law. It's a state driven law. And he was involved in real estate development. So let's just take his idea that he had and I'll explain it to you. He would build 10 townhomes. He would sell 7, keep 3, refinance them, put a tenant in, and go do it again and again and again. And it was a great idea. And I was looking at it one day and I was in front of a whiteboard, I think in his office. And I started looking at his deal flow and how the taxes worked. And I was like, you did it this way, and started like diagramming it out. And you can see I diagram a lot. Started diagramming it. Like, and if we pull the money out here and we do this, like you're not gonna have any tax at all.
Well,
And he's like, "Well, explain that to me." And so we started getting into 1031s, into 721 upreats, into DSTs, and the slim in 1031s, how to offset the tax. And that was in 2011. And I want to say it's like 2015. So I'm working with this client for years. 2015, I think I worked like 50 Saturdays that year.
wow.
And I don't know how many Sundays I worked, but I was just miserable year round.
Mm,
I wasn't a good father, wasn't a good husband. I was a terrible friend. I was in a bad mood. I was sleep deprived.
mm,
Health was terrible. And I was out turkey hunting with a buddy of mine who's also a client. And he's like, "Hey, have you ever thought about a coin laundry?" I'm
mm,
like, "I have never thought about a coin laundry. Why?" And so we started talking about that's the business he's in. He buys and sets up coin laundries.
mm, okay.
And smart guy, I think Furman undergrad, Vanderbilt Business School, like smart guy.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about it in earnest while we were out there walking the fields. And I was like, I bet the depreciation on that equipment was pretty good. So I was like, okay, so that's how you shelter your income. That depreciation's coming through to you. What does the cash flow on this look like? So we started doing that. So the next year I built a coin laundry
Mm,
uh, because I needed another revenue stream that where I wouldn't have to work 50 Saturdays
mm, sure.
here.
Yeah.
And Did that for a year, and the firm, I started hiring help, and then I sold the coin laundry, and I took the money from that and I bought a short-term rental.
Mm.
I paid off a student loan. I bought my wife a new wedding ring, and I bought some new shotguns because I do hunt. And that was the start of it. And then I took the lesson I learned from my other client about build 10, sell 7, keep 3.
Mhm.
And I went to my wife. I'm like, look, I'm going to do this real estate thing. And she's like, I'll get in with you. And so we had that one short-term rental. Then we bought 2 long-term rentals. Then we sold the short-term rental a year later and bought 13 single family homes.
Wow.
And so the idea was, okay, well, slow and steady is going to win the race.
Mhm.
And then we started overlaying depreciation.
Mm.
And she started to see how it all works. And, once we had done that and we increased the value by doing some improvements to the properties, then we had equity. And I'm like, here's how this is going to work. We're going to take our portfolio, we're going to go borrow the equity from it, and we're going to buy more real estate. And it's just going to snowball.
Mhm.
And that was in like 17, 18, and 19. And yeah, our tax bill plummeted with the depreciation that we're able to use. And because we do self-manage, we were able to shelter quite a bit of income. I think one year we got $140,000 back in taxes.
Wow.
And so you just take that, you drop it on the debt, and suddenly you've got more equity.
Mm.
And so
Yeah.
you just grow and grow and grow. And then suddenly you have income streams. You have real estate income coming in. And yeah, maybe you don't have to work 50 Saturdays. Maybe you only work, 2.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's how it works. And that's what got us into it. And it all started with that client that showed me how he does his business plan. And I'm like, well, let's do it this way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just tweaked it. That's
Mm.
all I did.
Wow. Well, and it sounds like it's evolved today too, to where you said you were getting on the GP and the LP side and things like that. So what is it today that you're looking for from a real estate perspective? And what is it are you trying to satisfy? Is it still, a tax? Is it cash flow? Is it equity? Is it all those things? Or
So right now I'm really focused on cash flow. I think I have the tax picture under control for my family. And what I would like to see next is to retire my wife.
okay.
So it's all about cash flow for me right now. And one of the things I've really been looking at are oil and gas leases.
Mm.
And it also falls under the real estate world where you can 1031 into those.
Mhm.
So, oil and gas right now it's top of mind right now for me. There's a fund out of Texas that I've been looking at, and I'm like, all right, well, let's put $100,000 into it and, get our return. And so, that is something that I'm really contemplating, because the next big milestone in my life is to get my wife retired.
Okay.
I'm fine to keep working till I'm, 55, 60, but I'd like to go ahead and retire her now so she can be, the stay-at-home mom that she wants to be to her son. And, you know, that's my goal right now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a worthy goal. And what is so talk to me about, from your perspective, how you would do diligence a deal and an operator and all that kind of stuff. I'm curious to what that process looks like for you, with all the background you have and the legal side, and then the tax side, and just I'm curious to how that process works for you.
How I go through due diligence. Yeah. So the first thing I start with, let's just take a basic real estate deal. I want to know, where's the property. And then you start running numbers on the property. What is the purchase price? What are we going to have to put into it to make it valuable? How's it going to cash flow? What does the distribution waterfall look like? Start looking at the numbers. The numbers don't lie. But you know what? I was talking to a real estate investor this morning. He's like, we were talking about a certain city down here in the South. And he's like, on paper, it looks great, but I just can't find anybody that can make it work. I'm like, well, it's kind of odd if the numbers work and the demographic is there, why is it not working? Um, so you have to get into these other nuanced issues like, is the area up and coming? Is it developing? Is it gentrifying? Why are we investing in this particular deal at this particular property?
Mhm.
So that's first. Then I want to see who are the managers of the deal. Like, what is their experience? Have
Mhm.
they done this before? And it doesn't mean that they can't do it if they've never done it before, because I've seen a lot of success stories out there. But you're putting $100,000, $200,000 into a deal. You want to make sure that your money is going to be well cared for and that
Mm.
you're going to get a return. So that's how I start looking at a deal. And then along the way, I start looking at how the money's moving and how to make it more tax efficient.
Mm.
So that's where I start overlaying my background in tax. I'm like, all right, well, if we do this and we do that, and do we need to roll it through this company? And how are these payments coming out? And who are they going to? What are the local taxes in the area? For example, Tennessee has a franchise and excise tax. And, we don't have an income tax per se, but the F&E tax, the franchise and excise tax, is like 6.25%.
Mm.
So, how do we minimize that? How do we get around that? Is there an exemption for it? And the answer to all that is yes, there's an exemption for it. But what if I'm investing in Alabama? Or what if I'm down in Georgia? What about Florida? Or what about Texas? So you really have to look at the area, what the tax profile of that area looks like,
Mm.
and is it going to impact the profitability of the deal?
Mm.
So that's really how I start with my due diligence. And that takes weeks.
Yeah,
to go through.
I could imagine. Yeah.
Weeks. And then you start looking at, well, what does the offering look like? Or which part of 506 is this? And is it accredited investors? Is it friends and family? What are we looking at? What do we want it to be? How do we get it to do that? And so that's really what the due diligence looks like for us.
Mm.
And it's constant reading, constant number crunching. We're on phones with accountants like, hey, run it this way, do a pro forma on this, let's do another pro forma on that. What's the best case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? What's the internal rate of return? What does cash on cash look like for us? Um, is there a pref? What is that pref? What can we make it be?
Mm.
What is the time horizon on this deal? So that's everything we kind of go through in a nutshell when we're looking at a deal and starting to do our due diligence.
Yeah, yeah, that's great to hear. It sounds like you're dedicating a lot of time, and it sounds like you're maybe spending a little money there too. If you're working with a CPA to kind of test the underwriting and pro forma things out on your own and that kind of thing as well. So something not everybody goes to that extent to do, but I think is extremely important.
Yeah, you've got to stress test every deal. You
Mhm.
have to. I was, prior to COVID, I had 2 duplexes under contract in March of 2020. We were closing on let's say March 28th or something. And the governor of Tennessee declared a statewide emergency and shut the state down on the
Mm.
25th.
Mm.
I was like, well, there goes the deal. And, it killed the deal.
Wow.
So, there are things that come up that you have no control over, but on the other hand, there are things that just kind of fall in your lap sometimes. I was talking to a client that, this guy, he could just stub his toe and make money. I just felt like, oh my God. And he came to me as like, hey, I'm gonna set up this company. Are you interested in investing? I'm like, yes, because every time this guy sets up a company and runs it, it's always a home run.
Mm.
And if you saw this guy walking down the street, you're like, no, there's no way. He's
Mhm.
got this really long beard. It's kind of curly. He's got tattoos on his hands.
Mm.
The nicest guy you've ever met, but you would have no idea that this guy makes money hand over fist.
Mm.
And so when the opportunity came, I was like, yeah, I'll invest in that. But I did stress test the deal. And, I was like, this is incredible. The upside on this is incredible.
Mm.
Even like the worst case scenario of investing in this deal, I'm just going to get my money back in 3 years.
Was that real estate or something else? I'm assuming it was.
No,
Something else.
So do you know what a restoration company is? Like there are companies out there like Surf Pro and other restoration companies that come in when there's water damage or storm damage. He set one up, and I think last year we did 2.4 million.
Wow.
So, this year we're looking at a few things. We're looking at a new location to expand it, and we're trying to get into another state. So he's got to get a license to go into those states. So I'm helping with that. But yeah, the guy just stubs his toe and makes money.
And you're typically getting paid by insurance companies for that.
Yeah. So like State Farm, Farm Bureau, they pay for this work.
Yeah.
So it's really navigating a lot of different industries, navigating the insurance industry, the construction industry, and getting government contracts. I think that's the next thing to start looking at.
Wow.
Because it is a veteran owned company. He's a veteran.
Yeah.
And we want to see hey, what if we could do this on military bases and see how that goes?
Wow.
It could be very lucrative. Is it retirement money? No, but is it a good income stream? Yes. Let's say it's $1,000 a month. Okay, great. I only put X amount of dollars in. So in our dividend last year that he issued, we made all our money back from our first, contribution. And we've got all our money back. So now everything's just profit to us.
Wow. That's great.
It's great. It took 2 years, I think, to get all of our money back.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, he's done a great job. Like I said, the guy stubs his toe and makes I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, some people have that. It's just naturally born that way, or luck is on their side. But I know what you mean. Well, you mentioned you were an author as well. I want to talk about that. So you wrote a book. What was that about? What was the process of doing that? How the hell did you find the time with everything else you got going on?
Yeah, I mean, and it took quite a bit of time too. So that's an interesting story. As you know, I do a lot of real estate, and clients come to me and they would ask the same questions. And so I might have the exact same conversation 3 times in a week.
Sure.
So it got to the point where I wrote out an FAQ, frequently asked questions, that I was always asking and answering these questions. And so that started from a 1-page FAQ, and it grew to like 10 pages. And so I started working on it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to add a little bit more to it. And then I was on a podcast, and they asked me, hey, will you write 2 articles a month? I'm like, sure. Happy to do it. After a year of writing that, I had all these articles, and then I started looking at the FAQs, and I started looking at the articles. I'm like, what if I just put all this together and created a book out of it? Like, these are the chapters, this is the topic. So I did, because my outline grew to 55 pages. That was my outline. Was 55
wow.
pages.
Yeah.
So I just buckled down and wrote a book. It's called Replace Your Income, A Lawyer's Guide to Finding, Funding, and Managing Your Real Estate. And I talk about everything from, short-term rentals to long-term rentals to multifamily, single family. What is a cost segregation study? What is bonus depreciation? How does depreciation work? How does it offset your income? What is passive activity? What is active activity? How do they work together? What is the requirement for it to be real estate professional status? So that just kind of morphed, and now it's available on Amazon and I think Barnes and Noble. But now when people say, hey, can I book an hour of your time? I'm like, yeah, if you want to talk about real estate, maybe you should just buy the book. It's $20. It's a lot cheaper than booking time with me. And then if you have questions after that, let's talk.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the way I've dealt with these, people that want to get into real estate. Now I'm all for it. I think it's a great way to grow wealth, but at the same time, it's a lot easier just to read the book, because it'll answer so many of your questions.
Yeah.
It will teach you a lot of things that you probably don't know anyway. Like a lot of people don't understand cost segregation stuff.
Sure.
So it breaks that down for them. So it's stuff like that.
Wow. Well, we'll certainly link that in the show notes so people can get in on that, because I think that sounds like a great resource. Brian, this has been an amazing conversation. Yeah, just so many nuggets throughout. I'm looking forward to listening back listening back to the episode. So I can't thank you enough for being here and taking the time to talk to me. For people that want to get more involved with you and they want to get into your world and social media and things like that, how can they do that?
Yeah, they can find me on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube. Brian T. Boyd or Brian Boyd Tax Lawyer on YouTube. If you want to work with me, just reach out to me here at the firm. My email is bboyd@thompsonburton.com. So yeah, I mean, all day, every day, I get a lot of people come in through social media that they're like, hey, I liked what you had to say. And, can you explain this to me? Can we hire you to work with us? So a lot of my clients have actually come through social media where,
Mm.
they are accredited investors, or they do have money they need to work with, and they want to figure out, how do I do this? How do I stop working the 9 to 5? How do I get into deals?
Mhm.
And how do I make those deals work for me? So, when you do that with clients on a regular basis, they become very good clients, and a lot of them find me on Instagram or TikTok.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, Brian, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.